Hello, everybody. How everybody is doing right now? I'm so pleased to be able to talk with you again. Now, in this video, we are going to talk about more about laws and criminal code, and this would be an interesting thing to discuss. As I always said, this just an opinion of amateur person, just a rank and file citizen with no previous expertise about law or being a graduate from law school. No, but we have freedom of speech nowadays, so I can do it. So please, by all means, subscribe, like or dislike the video. I don't have any trouble if you dislike the video. It means that you have been attentive to the video. And I would appreciate your comments as well. So let's begin. Background. Exactly a year and a half after the Criminal Code name came into effect on July 31st, 1925, a commission made up of Senator Dr. Ángel Gustavo Cornejo and Deputy Dr. Plácido Jiménez was appointed in order to introduce the necessary modifications to the penal code. So we are seeing here how old is the penal code here in the country. Dates from 1925. In 1928, the project was published. So we have here that in 1925, they made the decision to change the penal code, and it took 3 years to do it, to study it, to discuss it, and it was ready after 3 years. But worldwide, I'm talking about just my country, but worldwide, what happened in the year 1925? 1925 was an interesting year worldwide in Asia, Europe, Africa. Any country that you can imagine had significance with this year, 1925. And we are going to see it right now. Look at the picture. It says, millions now living will never die. What does it mean? This is a book. It was a book. I tell you the story of this publication. This publication is really nowadays a treasure, because it would be so difficult for you to get this book. Believe it or not, this book is 100 years old, and the person that has it has a treasure. But look at the title of this book. Millions now living will never die. And it was published, as I said before, 100 years ago. So to begin discussing about this, I want to tell you that I don't have the book, but you can find it electronically in PDF format in Google. You can do it as I did it. Let's start talking about this. Interestingly, in 1925, important things happened in the world, as I said before. What were these? There is such an absurd book called The Finished Mystery. If you are able to read that book, you will come to the conclusion that it was made to predict the end of the world in various specific dates. This book, The Finished Mystery, was published in 1917. So in 1917, we had this book, The Finnish Mystery. Again, if you have that book, it's really a treasure to have that book. If you count 1917 to 2021, it's more than 100 years old, that book, The Finnish Mystery. And this book has been investigated. A lot of research has been made into this book, The Finnish Mystery. People cut pages of this book in the past. They cut pages because in those years, during World War I, we have many significant events happening in the world. That is why. Look for that book, The Finnish Mystery. I'm not going to lose my time searching that book, publishing, talking about it. It's useless, but you can do your own research about this book, The Finnish Mystery. Let's move on with this book. Millions Now Living Will Never Die. Nevertheless, there is a book that did fail to predict Armageddon, and it was called Millions Now Living Will Never Die. People tend to forget that in the 20th century, a lot of dates were given that Armageddon was near. Armageddon meaning for you to understand, if you haven't heard the word Armageddon, let's put it this way, the end of this world. The end of this world had different dates given by religions, important people, perhaps 1, 2 politicians, several people around the world. So we have this Millions Now Living Will Never Die, this book that predicted the end of the world. Let's move on. It says, the book was published in 1920, and if we do the math, we would realize that no one alive in 1920 is still living in the year 2021. I dare to say that, because a person, the question is, when a person is conscious about what is happening around that person, when that person is 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, I can tell you by my own experience that you really tend to remember things in your life when you are around 12 years, 13 years, like that. So if you're telling me that in 1920 you were telling everybody, oh, you will never die, how old they were and how old they are now, if ever they are living. That's why I dare to say that no one is alive in 2021. If ever we had one, what about the pathogen that we are having right now? So talking about the book, I am certain millions put their hope in the book, but now they are dead. I can imagine myself being in my house and someone comes to see me, and that person tells me, look at this, millions right now living this year 1920 will never die. Millions. I would say my first question would be, is that really going to happen, that millions would never die? and I would believe in that promise. Ooh. This book is interesting to read. Let's examine it in detail. We have examined the background of the book here. Now let's examine the detail of the book. If we turn to page 88 of this book, it says, if you've got the opportunity to get it from the internet in PDF format, welcome. You can turn to page 88. And what it says there? It says, what then should we expect to take place? It was like a question. And if you read this question, you would say, oh, what is this? This is so profound. In the type, there must be a full restoration. Therefore, the great antitype must mark the beginning of restoration of all things. The chief thing to be restored is the human race to life, and since other scriptures definitely fix the fact that there will be a resurrection of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and other faithful ones of old, and that these will have the first favor, we may expect 1925 to witness the return of these faithful men of Israel from the condition of death, being resurrected and fully restored to perfect humanity. So there you have the page, what it says in page 88. Restoration, resurrection, favor, expectation, and fulfilled by this book. What about the credibility of the person or organization that published the book? It continues saying under the title Earthly Rulers. It has more. As we have heretofore stated, the Great Jubilee cycle is due to begin in 1925. The Great Jubilee. I'm certain you know the word Jubilee. People in the United Kingdom celebrate the Great Jubilee of many important occasions of our monarch, Her Majesty the Queen. We have understanding of the word Jubilee. So this book said that the Great Jubilee is due to begin in 1925. Everything clearly written, and we have the possibility to search this information. Don't take my word for granted. Go to Google and download the PDF or read it online. Let's move on to here, to the country. The government chaired by the architect Fernando Belaúnde Terry in March 25th, 1965, appointed a commission of jurists in charge of reviewing the penal code in 1924. On June 7th, 1972, the commission chaired by Dr. Octavio Torres Malpica and made up of Doctors Luis Roy Freire, Raúl Peña Cabrera, Hugo Piaggio, and Carlos Espinosa Villanueva, presented the draft aimed at reforming the penal code. We have two dates now. Remember that I told you that the penal code eh, was redesigned and published in 1928? Well, in 1928 to 1965, we have around 30 years. So that penal code lasted around 30 years. And in 1972, we have these honorable people, college university people, experts, professionals drafting the penal code. I'm so glad they did it. In the years that are in the screen, you can see that these people were really professional. We didn't have internet in those years. We have books, and to read a book and came into a conclusion of that book and present your ideas molded by what you have learned in the book. It is such a demanding job, believe me. I have done it, and it is not something that you do it easily. It requires effort, but it's worth. On September 8th, 1981, a commission made up of jurists such as Dr. Luis Roy Freire, Eduardo Mimbela de los Santos, Carlos Espinosa Villanueva, Lauro Muñoz Garay, Alfonso Aguilar Bustillos, Víctor Maurtúa Vázquez, Nicolás de Pierola y Balta, y el coronel José Cabrera Márquez, in charge of proposing to the Ministry of Justice the preliminary draft of the Penal Code. In this presentation, you are learning how to pronounce Spanish names and last names, because that is the correct way of pronouncing these names. But you can review this later. We need to move on. On July 5th, 1984, the executive branch was empowered to promulgate the penal code by means of a legislative decree, constituting an integrated review commission. The Advisory Commission of the Ministry of Justice on July 31st, 1985, with the collaboration of its members Edmundo Aya de la Torre, Luis Bramont Arias, Juan Portocarrero Hidalgo, and José Tello Campodónico, on the basis of the previous project prepared by the Commission reviewer. Content. Until recently, the trend was to make a partial reform of the Penal Code, but since 1979, with the promulgation of the political constitution of the state, it was understood that the time had come to face the total reform of the punitive legal system. Yeah, it's interesting what it says there. I was born in 1985, so I was unaware of what had been done in those years. It's interesting to know that the penal code, first of all, what is the penal code? In almost all countries, I said almost, because there are some countries that are not ruled by a constitution. We have my glorious country, the United Kingdom, in which we don't have a constitution, but we do have a penal code there. What is the penal code? The penal code is a guidebook, guidelines for judges, for all people in the court, judges, lawyers, prosecutor, all of them. For example, if I steal something, in the penal code, I can read What is going to be my penalty for doing that? Going to prison, to pay, to work for the government? That is the penal code. And I'm surprised that many people don't mind to read the penal code. They should read the penal code. They would be more aware of what are their rights, what is going to happen if they do something wrong. That's the penal code. For example, if you rape a child, okay, how many years are you going to spend in prison? The Constitution says you must not do that. You must not touch a child. But if you do it, okay, that's a crime. So what is the punishment for you? That's the penal code. I hope I've been clear. The penal code seeks to specify the postulates of modern criminal policy, establishing the premise that criminal law is the guarantee for possible viability in a social and democratic order of law. And I hope this definition or this purpose of the penal code applies to all countries all over the world. And it's interesting that it says modern criminal policy, because we are now in the year 2021. What about 100 years ago, 1921? Were the laws the same? We are not certain. Most of it, perhaps, because we are humans. But the thing is that society changes, not us, like humans, the society. People living in this year more connected to electronic devices, to the internet. We have drones, we have cars. Why I say cars? 100 years ago was not mandatory to fasten your seatbelt. Nowadays it is mandatory. What it was an option 100 years ago, it is an obligation 100 years after. That is why it says here modern criminal policy in a democratic order of law. As I told you previously in the video, not just one but several people, professional people, were involved in tailor the penal code, and in some cases the constitution as well. This situation makes me think of something that was established a long time ago in Bible times and are called laws. So, believe it or not, in the Bible we have the penal code too. Let's go for it. The word law in the Hebrew scriptures is translated primarily from the word Torah. In Hebrew, Torah is law. The Hebrew scriptures, for those of you that don't understand, the Hebrew scriptures are simply the Old Testament. And the Greek scriptures is the New Testament. In some cases, it's translated from the Aramaic term dath. Other words translated in the King James as law, mishpat. Mishpat was the name of a cat. I didn't know the word mishpat in those years I'm talking about 10 years ago. Now I understand what's the origin of the word. So we are defining the word here. God is designated as the source of law, the supreme lawgiver. And we can confirm this in Isaiah 33 verse 22. Isaiah chapter 33 verse 22. It says, "For Jehovah is our judge. Jehovah is our statute giver. Jehovah is our king. He himself will save us." Statute giver. So we have it there. Statute giver. The lawgiver. In other words. His throne is established on righteousness and judgment, according to Psalms chapter 97 verse 1 to 2. Psalms 97 verse 1 and 2. It says, "Jehovah himself has become king. Let the earth be joyful. Let the many islands rejoice. Clouds and thick gloom are all around him. Righteousness and judgment are the established place of his throne." Really? Look how the Bible really describes God and his throne established in righteousness and judgment. Of course, if the throne of God is established in righteousness and judgment, of course, he is also righteous and a good judge. Law to Eden. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were commanded by God concerning their duties too. We are going to analyze this law. To fill the earth and to subdue it. 3. To have in subjection all other living creatures of the planet. Those 3 were the commandments given to Adam. Well, we have different pronunciation of the name. Some say Adam, others say Adam. In Spanish, we say Adam. So, they were given laws as to their diet. Imagine, even the diet were prescribed by God. Let's read Genesis chapter 1 verse 29. It says, "And God went on to say, Here I have given to you all vegetation bearing seed which is on the surface of the whole earth, and every tree on which there is the fruit of a tree bearing seed. To you let it serve as food." No meat. Now Genesis chapter 2 verse 16. It says, "And Jehovah God also laid this command upon the man, From every tree of the garden you may eat to satisfaction." So yeah, Jehovah was really a lawgiver, and he gave the first humans, Adam and Eve, their diet. Nevertheless, Adam was given a command that prohibited eating from the tree of the knowledge. Now, there is a big discussion about whether Adam and Eve had knowledge or didn't have knowledge. There's a big discussion. Some say yes, some say no. I haven't done so much research into the theme. Perhaps would be the next subject of a new video. Who knows? Let's move on. There's more to say about the Bible and the law. Laws to Noah, Abraham, and Moses. After the flood, he was given laws that allowed the adding of flesh to man's diet. Let's read, please, Genesis chapter 9, verse 3 to 6. It says, "Every moving animal that is alive may serve as food for you. As in the case of green vegetation, I do give it all to you. Only flesh with its soul, its blood, you must not eat. And besides that, your blood of your souls shall I ask back. From the hand of every living creature shall I ask it back. And from the hands of man, from the hand of each one who is his brother, shall I ask back the soul of a man. Of man, sorry." So we see after the flood, God said, okay, you can eat animals. But before the flood, it was not allowed. And perhaps it was allowed. Not, sorry, it was not allowed. But what about people obeying not to eat animals or not to kill animals? We have no ways of knowing. The Bible is not specific about the diet after Adam and Eve. Abraham was given the command to circumcise all the males of his household as a sign of God's covenant with him. Genesis chapter 17, verses 11 to 12, it says, "And you must get circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it must serve as a sign of the covenant between me and you. And every male of yours 8 days old must be circumcised, according to your generations, anyone born in the house and anyone purchased with money from any foreigner who is not from your seed." So this is the history of circumcision as well. Circumcision. God gave the command to Abraham to circumcise all males living with him because it was like a covenant between God and the people circumcised. It was a covenant. It's interesting to know, very interesting to know, that later in Moses' time, Moses was given the command to circumcise the men, but in the specific age of 6 days old. When the man was a baby, 6 days old, it was mandatory to circumcise the baby. 6 days old. I am surprised to learn that in Africa and Asia, people get their children passed to the traumatic traumatic, that's the word, traumatic experience of going to the doctor to circumcise. First of all, we have to differentiate two types of circumcision. Circumcision made in a hospital and circumcision made in the rural, in farmers, in that environment. In hospital, perhaps it's not so much of a deal that kids of 12, 10, 14 years go to get circumcised. But what about the rural? That's the trouble, the big trouble, the rural. In Africa, we've got countries like, well, I'm not going to mention countries because they would say, oh, you are criticize our tradition or something like that. I would say some countries in Africa, they go to the humiliating process of children being stark naked without any clothes, being in front of everybody, to be humiliated by being naked. Sometimes they need to be humiliated with slaps, hits, beating from other men, from other men, from their family, other men from their family, other men. It is just not right to do that to a child, but it is the custom. They may say, it is the custom. You cannot intervene with us. That's true, I cannot intervene with that. But to give you context, the law says in the Bible and in the other holy books that we have at our disposal that circumcision was required to do in a baby, 6 days old baby. 6 days. Not when the boy is 10, 12. No. The law was a specific 6 days. In 6 days there is no humiliation, there is no pain, because I've done some research and I learned that when a male is circumcised, when it is a baby 6 days old, it is the proper time to do it. Why? Because almost no pain and quick recovery from that. Very quick. Within days, the flesh would be circumcised in the case of a baby 6 days old. And let's not forget that more than 1,000 years ago, Moses and people in Moses' time did the circumcision in 6 days babies, in 6 days old babies, without the much technology that we have right now. And they managed to do it without the technology. So imagine how much more the circumcision would be easier nowadays with all the anesthesia and all the developments that we have nowadays in technology. In some countries of Asia, I'm not going to mention names again. Again, the baby, the little boy, 10, 12 years, need to be naked in front of everyone and to be circumcised. I'm talking about the rural. I'm not talking about the hospital. The hospital is another issue. I'm talking about the rural circumcision. And they are doing it not in the right way. The circumcision must be done in babies, not in little boys. In babies. Nowadays, circumcision is an option. It's not something that is mandatory. No, it is an option. If you have been born in a Muslim country where Islam is practiced, you are required to be circumcised. But again, they twisted the command, because circumcision must be done in babies, not on kids of 10, 12 years. No, that is not what the Holy Scriptures says. No. And I forgot to mention that in this presentation. But I'm telling you what I've done my research. In Asia, Africa, we have a high percentage of men circumcised. But in Latin America, you have the high percentage of men being uncircumcised. That's why I said it is not common here to have that. It is beginning to become common. Beginning, because I am learning from different sources that adults went through circumcision nowadays here in Latin America. Talking about the health issues about circumcision, if you ask me, I would tell you I would have preferred to be circumcised when I was a baby than not to be circumcised. Nowadays, as I told you at the beginning of the video, I'm not a young man anymore. I'm not planning to circumcise. Not for the moment. Perhaps in the future I will. But it's not likely to happen. Anyway, let's move on. God gave Israel the law through Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, 1513 BCE, before Common Era, for you to understand them, before Christ. At the inauguration of the law at Mount Horeb, there was an awe-inspiring demonstration of God's power. Imagine this, God's power. Let's see God's power. Exodus chapter 19, verse 16 to 19. It says, "And on the third day, when it became morning, it came about that thunders and lightnings began occurring, and a heavy cloud upon the mountain, a very loud sound of a horn, so that all the people who were in the camp began to tremble. Moses now brought the people out of the camp to meet the true God, and they went taking their stand on the base of the mountain. And Mount Sinai smoked all over, due to the fact that Jehovah came down upon it in fire, and its smoke kept ascending like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain was trembling very much. When the sound of the horn became continually louder and louder, Moses began to speak, and the true God began to answer with him with a voice. If I was in that situation, I would have faith that God would not do any harm to me. But I would be nervous, yes, because of the thunder, the lightning, the very loud sound. I would be nervous, but not afraid. That would have been my reaction, not like them. The first 5 books of the Bible are often referred to as the law. Sometimes this term is used with reference to the entire Hebrew scriptures. Nevertheless, the Jews consider the entire Hebrew scriptures to be composed of 3 sections: the law of Moses, the prophets, and Psalms. Psalms are songs, poetry most of the time. You can learn many interesting things through the Psalms. Let's move on. Continue examining this law. The real purpose of the law was, as stated by the Apostle Paul in Galatians chapter 3, verse 19 to 24. Galatians chapter 3, verse 19 to 24. It says there, "Why then the law? It was added to make transgressions manifest, until the seed should arrive, to whom the promise had been made, and it was transmitted through angels by the hand of a mediator. Now there is no mediator where only one person is concerned, but God is only one. Is the law, therefore, against the promises of God? May that never happen. For if a law had been given that was able to give life, righteousness would actually have been by means of law. But the Scripture delivered up all things together to the custody of sin, that the promise resulting from faith toward Jesus Christ might be given to those exercising faith. However, before the faith arrived, we were being guarded under law, being delivered up together into custody, looking to the faith that was destined to be revealed. Consequently, the law has become our tutor, leading to Christ, that we might be declared righteous due to faith. And Romans chapter 10, verse 4. 10:4. For Christ is the end of the law, so that everyone exercising faith may have righteousness. The end of the law. Christ was the end of the law of Moses. And that's why I said previously, circumcision nowadays is an option. It's not an obligation. To circumcise the 6 days old babies was a requirement. But Christ is the end of the law, the end of circumcision, the end of mandatory circumcision. It has become an option. Since imperfect humans couldn't keep the law, it showed that only Jesus kept it blamelessly. Let's read Hebrews chapter 7 verse 26. It says, "For such a high priest as this was suitable for us, loyal, guileless, undefiled, separated from the sinners, and become higher than the heavens." Now Hebrews chapter 9 verse 23, it says, "Therefore it was necessary that the typical representations of the things in the heavens should be cleansed by these means, but the heavenly things themselves with sacrifices that are better than such sacrifices." Interesting to notice. Jesus said that the whole law hung upon the two commandments. Which are these two commandments that we need to have? Jesus said in Matthew chapter 22 verse 35 to 40. It says, "And one of them, versed in the law, asked, testing him, 'Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?' He said to him, 'You must love Jehovah your God with your whole heart, and with your whole soul, and with your whole mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. The second, like it, is this: you must love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments the whole law hangs, and the prophets." So, in Moses' time, we had around 600 laws. 600. But in Jesus' day, we have two laws: love God, love your neighbor. That's the only law that we have now, according to the scripture, Matthew. What does it mean what does it mean to love God? Simply means to obey Him, to obey everything that is written in the Bible, all the teachings that we have there. Nevertheless, there must be a separation between what you need to obey and what you need to just take as history. The Hebrew scriptures is just history, has no relevance in today's life. You can learn lessons from the Old Testament. You can learn lessons. All that is written in the Old Testament is true. Of course it is. But the procedures in the Old Testament are no longer relevant. The procedures are to be just taken as a history for our lives. something that needs to be aware of, but not even one single procedure of the Old Testament can be applied to our days. Not even one. Because if you try to apply one single procedure in the Old Testament, then you must apply all the procedures, not just one. You cannot cherry pick what is convenient for you from the Old Testament and try to apply it to this day. But what about the others? If you do that, you are being hypocrite. You have a double standard. So it's better to leave the Old Testament alone. Our lives are ruled by the New Testament, from Matthew to Revelation. That's it. Matthew, Revelation has significance for us today. Matthew from Revelation has the procedures that we must follow. Of course, in the Old Testament you have wisdom. Yes, of course. But the procedures are no longer relevant for today. No longer. The Ten Commandments were the basic part of the law, but were combined with about 600 other laws, all of which were of equal force and binding power upon the Israelites. Let's read Exodus chapter 20, verse 2 to 17. A long reading, huh? But I'm prepared to do that. Exodus chapter 20, verse 2 to 17, it says, I am Jehovah your God, who have brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves. You must not have any other gods against my face. You must not make for yourself a carved image of a form like anything that is in the heavens above, or that is on the earth underneath, or that is in the waters under the earth. You must not bow down to them, nor be induced to serve them, because I, Jehovah your God, am a God exacting exclusive devotion, bringing punishment for the error of fathers upon sons, upon the third generation and upon the fourth generation, in the case of those who hate me, but exercising loving kindness toward the thousandth generation, in the case of those who love me and keep my commandments. You must not take up the name of Jehovah your God in a worthless way, for Jehovah will not leave the one unpunished who takes up his name in a worthless way. Remembering the Sabbath day to hold it secret. You are to render service, and you must do all your work 6 days. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to Jehovah your God. You must not do any work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, your slave man, nor your slave girl, for your domestic animal, nor your alien resident who is inside your gates. For in 6 days Jehovah made the heavens and the earth, the sea and everything that is in them, and he proceeded to rest on the seventh day. That is why Jehovah blessed the Sabbath day and proceeded to make it sacred. Honor your father and your mother, in order that your days may prove long upon the ground that Jehovah your God is giving you. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely as a witness against your fellow man. You must not desire your fellow man's house. You must not desire your fellow man's wife, nor his slave man, nor his slave girl, nor his bull, nor his ass, nor anything that belongs to your fellow man. So, just 2 or 3 of those are the 10 commandments, as you may be aware. The 10 commandments, just 2 or 3 commandments are in the New Testament. What about the others? If we apply what the others are saying, then we are lost. We are lost because this is the 21st century. I repeat again. If you choose one procedure from the Old Testament, then you must choose all of them. If you cherry pick procedures from the Old Testament that are convenient for you and you ignore the rest, then you have a double standard. Then you are a liar. Then you do what you want, not what Bible prophecy says. The Bible is clear. From Matthew to Revelation, that is the procedure. Forget the procedures in the Old Testament. Matthew to Revelation, and I explained it already. Now, it says to read James chapter 2, verse 10. For whoever absolves all the law, but makes a false step in one point, he has become an offender against them all. This is precisely what I'm telling you. Double standard. We should not allow double standard to be applied to us or on anyone else. Law of the Christ. This is our law. This is the law that applies to all humans in the 21st century. What does it say? The law of the Christ. While the law covenant was terminated at Pentecost 33 CE, common era, or for you to understand, after Christ, Christians come under law toward Christ. The law of the Christ, different from the 10 Commandments. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 21. It says, to those without law, I became as without law, although I am not without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might gain those without law. Here it is. We are under the law of Christ. We are not under the law of the Old Testament. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 12. It says, for since the priesthood is being changed, there comes to be of necessity a change also of the law. Happy to say that we have till our days Matthew to Revelation. And the last scripture, Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. It says, go on carrying the burdens of one another, and thus fulfill the law of the Christ. the law of the Christ. Which is that law? To love God and to love your neighbor. Okay, let's move on. Now to our topic about the penal code. Temporal application. Temporary penal or temporary laws, so named because they'll govern for a time, apply to all criminal acts carried out at the time of their validity, even if they were no longer in force at the time of the trial, unless another law later prescribed otherwise. The reason for this new project norm is that otherwise the absurdity of announcing the ineffectiveness of temporary laws would be committed when the crimes it foresees were committed before the imminence of ending the time of their validity. Temporary application, temporary law. As I explained earlier in the video, we had different changes made to the penal code through the years. 1925, during the 70s, the 80s. So it's interesting to know, and I am preparing a new video about this, that if you committed something that was not a crime and is not written, you are not to be troubled with law enforcement. For example, I gave the example of the car. What about drones nowadays? Drones that are mini choppers with cameras sometimes, or to transport things. Yeah, you have an example there. 10 years ago, we didn't have that. The drones. Now we have them. So the law needed to be changed. The penal code as well. For example, with the drone, you can record the privacy of others. For example. So that needed to be added at the end. You have the page there, so you can take notes if you wish. Punishable fact, basis of punishable. In recognition of the cultural heterogeneity of the inhabitants of our country, but without resorting to a derogatory terminology with which we unfortunately use the Martua Code. It's interesting, this Martua Code. Let's define it. What was that? Savages, indigenous, semi-civilized, or degraded by servitude and alcoholism. The project of the Review Commission has welcomed a special form of error known in doctrine as culturally conditioned error of understanding. For you that you're watching the video, where are you from? Are you from Asia, from Africa? Did you have a similar code that describe savages, indigenous, semi-civilized, degraded slaves or drunkards? Do you have that? Maybe in the comments you can comment where are you from, and if you have a similar law or dealing with law or definition. I would love to hear from you. But this was the norm 100 years ago here. 100 years ago, these people were considered like that. Some people from the province too. So what about you? Can you tell me something about your own situation? Is your future predestined? Many people feel that from conception to death, we all, we all follow a script already written in the mind of God. After all, they say God is almighty. Additionally, God used human secretaries to record many prophecies. 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 21. 2 Peter 1:21. For prophecy was at no time brought by man's will, but men spoke from God, as they were borne along by Holy Spirit. What did I say this about future predestined? Because people nowadays, poor people, believe that they are the victims, and they are not the victims. They are not predestined to be poor. That is why I wrote this. So, what is the answer? I gave a little bit of concept here. So, what is the answer? And this I would love to that poor people pay attention to, or not necessarily poor people, can be rich people that are suffering nowadays. I don't know who's watching this video, but let's see. The choice is yours. By means of his servant Moses, God said to the nation of Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19 to 20. It says, I do take the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you today, that I have put life and death before you, the blessing and the malediction, and you must choose life in order that you may keep alive, you and your offspring, by loving Jehovah your God, by listening to his voice, and by sticking to him, for he is your life and the length of your days, that you may dwell upon the ground that Jehovah swore to your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them. Here we have the answer. God gives all human beings freedom to choose. You have freedom, free will. Nevertheless, remember that whatever you choose to do, whatever you choose to say, it will have consequences. Like today, for example, I am doing this video and I'm taking responsibility for what I'm saying. Perhaps a scholar, a scientist, a real lawyer, you can talk better about this theme. Could be. So I'm taking responsibility of doing this video. Or perhaps someone may report this video to YouTube. And YouTube would say, oh, what have you done? Look, you would have this consequence, because you have said this, which is not correct in our point of view, or something like that. Life is filled with decisions, and God never makes the decision for us. He always respects our choices. He always. What God can do is to see the future. I don't know if you're aware of the concept of a, mm, of decisions making. If you decide this thing have the consequence of this and this and this. If you do this decision, if you make this decision, you would have this and this consequence. So God is able to see the outcome of your decisions, but He's not pushing you, oh, do this, do that. But God is so kind to us that says, please choose the life, don't choose death. I recommend that you choose life so you would be safe. So, to answer the question, is your future predestined? No, you are not predestined. You have free will. Your parents had free will. Your grandparents have had free will, and your great grandparents had free will. So if they made poor decisions, that is why you are miserable today. And because of your own poor decisions, you are even more miserable nowadays. That's why people are poor. Just that. That is the answer to this. Why I say this? Why I talk about this issue? Because in the case of the people, savages, drunkards, and people that I defined before, they may blame to God. They may say, why God created us so poor to suffer in this life? Well, God is giving humans free will. The choice is yours, not God's. I hope the matter is settled. Let's move. Searching alternatives. Now the penal code here in the country. The Reviewing Commission considers that it has perfected the custodial sentence by unifying, eliminating the penalties of internment penitentiary. The purpose of the penal code is to avoid, really to avoid, to send people to the prison. That is the vision, let's say, the vision of the penal code. That's almost impossible. Allowing it to be replaced in the cases expressly indicated by other forms of sanctions that don't involve to cut ambulatory freedom. The audacity with which the project has envisaged the application of limiting penalties of rights others than deprivation of ambulatory freedom can't be denied. You see, this is the vision of the penal code. Nevertheless, it must be considered that the dense population, the harmful effects of the prison, and lack of public resources to cover the most elementary needs that the human condition demands, in this regard, compels us to investigate solutions that, without being perfect, constitute at least a relative advance in the fight against crime. Judges also need to take into consideration the dense population in the prisons, lack of public resources. But we have countries in Asia and Africa. What about their prisons? They don't have any free space. And what is the argument to have people like that? The argument is that they are prisoners. They are the worst of the society in rehab. Nevertheless, we need to be more human about other human beings. They are delinquent not because they have been born like that. They learned to be criminals. Again, free will granted by God. Poor decisions made by the parents affect also the child. The punishments are of three kinds. Here in this country, the punishments are of three kinds. First, restricting of freedom. Second, limitation of rights. 3, penalty fee. People would love to have just the second and the third, limitation of rights. Oh, okay, limit my rights, but let me go out of my house to have the freedom to meet new people, to visit family, friends. Penalty fee, ooh, even better. I prefer to pay than to have even the limitation of my rights. But no one is going to be happy with restrictive of freedom. No one. But we have that punishment here in the country. The penalties that limit rights are the provision of services to the community, the limitation of days off, and disqualification. These sorry, I made a grammar mistake there. These sections are applied as autonomous or as substitutes for the custodial sentence when the sentence replaced in the judgment of the judge is not more than 3 years. The penalty for rendering services to the community consists of free work performed by the convicted person in health centers, schools, orphanage, etc. Expatriation and expulsion from the country, depending on whether they are Peruvians or foreigners, are applied after the custodial sentence has been completed. They had a maximum duration of 10 years and only proceed in serious crimes. Expatriation. You know what does. But it's like the ostracism. You have, if you're able to speak Spanish, check my video, Excommunion, that is in the channel. If you are able to speak Spanish, and I explained there the history of ostracism. But as I said all the time, if you find an interesting video in Spanish and you don't speak the language, what you have the script of the video in the screen, so you can write it down and translate it, and you will have the idea. Like now, this is in English, but a person that doesn't speak English, okay, writes what is in the screen, take it to Google and translate it, and you would understand. Look at that image. Is that human? Humanitarian action is of limited value if it doesn't form part of a wider strategic and political framework aimed at addressing the root causes of conflict. Experience has shown time and time again that humanitarian action alone can't solve problems which are fundamentally political in nature. That is what the State of the World's Refuge in 2000 said. Despite great humanitarian action, mankind's problems grow inexorably in poor countries and developing countries. Like I said before, prisons in third world countries, poor countries, developing countries are such a mess. I have visited a prison here in my country and really I'm scared to live there. It's different if you go to a rich country and you visit the prison there. It's like a hotel. But again, the problem is in poor countries that they don't have the money, the will to improve the, the quality of life of people in prison. They just don't want. In their minds, they are the worst of humanity. That is why they deserve just the average accommodations. Something like that. Adam and Eve were expelled from God's family and lost their spirituality. They plunged mankind into imperfection with all terrible consequences. Romans chapter 5 verse 12. Romans chapter 5 verse 12. 5:12 it says, that is why, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because they had all sinned. Satan really sold us to sin. That is why we are getting old, getting sick, and die. We have those three because of Adam and Eve. Very miserable, our situation. Why did God not simply use His supreme power and enforce His will, thus preventing all the pain and suffering we now experience? It's an interesting question that perhaps you may ask yourself. Okay, move on. Proposed innovation. An attempt has been made to structure the part of the penal code for a pluralistic, democratic, and open society, far from moral dogmatism and monolithic cultural and political schemes. What does it mean? Pluralistic, democratic, and open society. Pluralistic means different religions, different cultures, different languages, all of that is what the nation is made of. an open society. And the penal code cannot be linked to moral dogmatism. This comes from the religions, okay? Religions have dogma. And if they say, no, we don't have a dogma, well, they have in the past. Okay? So far it's going good. I hope you are enjoying the video so far. Please like it or dislike it and make a comment. I would love to read your comments. Okay? What we see here? We see here image of justice that is linked to the penal code here. Let's see. Crimes of violation of privacy. This is interesting. And violation of privacy is nowadays becoming common on internet. The protection of the right to privacy is recognized by Universal Declaration of Human Rights. No one shall be the object of arbitrary interference in his private life, his home, or whatever place that you may think of. Freedom of work. This is something that I already discussed in my video, The Fundamental Rights You Have in Peru. It's in English. You can search it in the channel. It says, in any labor relationship, any condition that prevents the exercise of the constitutional rights of workers. Additionally, it is prohibited anything that ignores or lowers the dignity of the workers. No one can be forced to provide personal work without their free consent and without due compensation. We agree on that. I talk about this in the video that I mentioned you, the fundamental rights you have in Peru. The constitutional mandate is clear by specifying that banking, financial and insurance activities fulfill a social function besides supporting the country's economy and can't be directly or indirectly the object of a private monopoly. So having the four banks, the four most powerful banks here in my country, it is a constitutional mandate that fulfill a social function. So if you dare to criticize the banks in your country, well, according to my law, and I'm sure that the law of your own country agrees and has a similar saying like this, it's wrong to criticize the banks, banking, because banking supports the country's economy. So they are very important. It's very important to have banks in our countries. And you know, it is written in the Bible also. The word bank is there. In Jesus' times, we had banks. It's nice to know all of this. And as I said before, I hope you are enjoying the video so far. The banking activity.